Hello everybody and welcome to my deck showcase of the new way to play Witchcrafter in Master Duel. As you may know, today is the day where finally, after a long time of wait, we Witchcrafter players finally get our new boss monster, Witchcrafter Weissmadam, which is a huge game changer for our entire playstyle. Previously, most we could do is that we would use Witchcrafters effect to special summon either Heine or Ver to the field and then pretty much just try and pass and try to survive to the best of our abilities. That was pretty much the entire Witchcrafter plan. You get kind of annoying with Madame Ver and Heine. Try to get them both on the field, but most of the time getting both of them out at the same time would be impossible unless you would play a 60 card grass version and you somehow manage to resolve grass and kind of have the perfect storm. But now that we have Weissmadam on the game, we actually are more than that. We do not have to play a 60 card version. We are now a certified combo deck. And this is pretty much the standard version of how to play the deck. We play 3 copies of the new fusion spell, Witchcrafter Confusion Confession, which is basically just a polymerization with the added effect of it being a Witchcrafter card and also coming back to the hand at the end phase if you have a Witchcrafter on the field. Standard Witchcrafter spell stuff, basically. We also play 3 copies of Magicalized Fusion, since obviously we don't want to rely on just drawing into our new fusion spell. That would be way too inconsistent. And just as a disclaimer, this deck, while it can really combo off pretty hard, it can also be very feast or famine. If you have the right hand, and one of the ways to use in your opening hand, then you can build a very strong board, but it is also possible that you may end up with a hand that's almost unplayable. But more often than not, you will at the very least be able to get out Witchcrafter Weissmadam, which is our main objective. And you're not always forced to draw into the Confusion Confession spell, since we also play, obviously, most of the smaller Witchcrafter monsters that we had in the game previously, like Jenny and Schmieta. With their graveyard effects, you can get the fusion into your graveyard and then use it from the graveyard with Jenny's effect. We are also playing 3 copies of Reasoning, since we still love our graveyard effects and it can be a free special summon if your opponent calls the wrong number. And we play a lot of different monsters, so it is not easy for your opponent to predict which monster you might draw into with the Reasoning effect. We also play 3 copies of Magician's Restage, since in general it is a very good card for us. It can be used to basically Monster Reborn a Jenny or a Magician's Soul or a Pottery, which gives us an additional body on the field, which we can use to link climb. And the important part is also that when Magician's Restage goes to the graveyard, it can be used to search the right hand or the left hand, which is just very good interruption. As for the old Witchcrafter spells, we play 3 copies of Creation, a very important consistency tool. Sometimes you will end up with no small Witchcrafter monster in your hand, but that can be rectified with Creation. We use 3 copies of Holiday, since it's basically Monster Reborn, but for the Witchcrafter archetype, very important. And as I said, 3 copies of the new spell. Also, I like to run Witchcrafters by Street personally, because it offers good protection. But if your opponent knows what they are doing, it can easily be played around, so I'll leave it to your own discretion whether you want to run by street or not. And we have Witchcrafter Draping, which can be a good option to get rid of some pesky back row of your opponent. Again, if you want to play this, then it can be good in an environment where there's a lot of back row decks, but there certainly is better back row removal. But the big upside of this one is that it can be really easily accessible through Shmierta's Graveyard Effect and Jenny's Graveyard Effect. If you want, you could instead just play an honest Harpy's Feather Duster. That is also perfectly valid. Or if you think that the current meta environment leans more towards big combo decks with a lot of negates, then you could also consider playing another Forbidden Droplet, or perhaps something like Dark Ruler No More, Lightning Storm, all the good stuff to break a board. Next up, I would like to bring your attention to the Magician's Souls engine, which is basically another very good extender for the Witchcrafter deck. It's a free special summon of a level 1. And not only do you have these 3 copies of Magician's Souls, we also have Illusion of Chaos, which basically acts as 3 extra copies of Magician's Souls. Since Illusion of Chaos can bring a card back to the deck in order to search Magician's Soul from your deck to your hand. That can be great to reset garnets, like if you maybe have both Heine and Vare on your opening hand, which is very unfortunate. You can use Illusion of Chaos to bring them back to the deck, so that they can be special summoned with your smaller Witchcrafters. Next up, we have, of course, our new card, Witchcrafter Vice Madame. I like to play 2 copies of her, since sometimes it does come up that your board does get broken and you are forced to summon another one, or it can be just used as another big beat stick on the field. Keep in mind, all the effects of Witchcrafter Vice Madame are hard once per turn on each, so even if you have multiple copies of Vice Madame on the field, you won't be able to use these effects twice, but you will be able to use each effect once. That is very important to realize. Each of these effects can be used once per turn during your turn and your opponent's turn. That means every turn you get to destroy a card, non-targeting. You get to special summon a level 6 or lower Witchcrafter monster from a deck or hand. And you get to add one Witchcrafter spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand. And all you need to do in order to do that is to play a spell card or use a non-fusion spellcaster monster's effect. And both of these we have aplenty. Also keep in mind that this also applies to your opponent. If your opponent plays a spell, you also get to trigger Vice Madame. Now for the next card in the extra deck we have Linkuriboh, which is a good defensive option sometimes since we have a lot of level 1s. Doesn't come up very often. If you think that there's something better, then you are free to change that out. We have Relinquished Anima, which is an amazing going second tool since we have so many level 1s. All we have to do is summon one of them, link him into Relinquished Anima, and just like that we can get rid of a monster that our opponent carelessly placed in front of our extra monster zone. Then we have Artemis the Magistus Moon Maiden, which her effect doesn't really matter. All we use her for is to link her through Magician's Soul, so that we can get Magician's Soul or sometimes even one of the other cards into the graveyard. That is her main purpose. We have Cross Sheep, which is a very important part of the combo. And we also have some of the Charmer cards. So Charmers are a very good link climbing tool, but they heavily rely on what your opponent has in the graveyard, since when you summon one of them, you get to basically take an opponent's monster with the corresponding attribute from their graveyard and summon it to your field. So Heater, obviously very good option, since Ash Blossom is a fire monster. We have Ausa, because Max Z exists. We have Lina, the Light Charmer, and Dark, the Dark Charmer, because Light and Dark are the two most represented attributes in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! And there's a good chance that your opponent is going to play either of those. Then we have 2 Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. Very common link climbing tool. If you get to have free materials on the field, you can use her to go into Access Code Talker very easily. Next up we have Appaloosa, which we can access very easily with our combo, and very important as a going first tool. And then we have Access Code Talker to close out games on the 3rd turn. Another card that I like to play that could be a little bit questionable is Predator Plant Verte Anaconda. Basically 2 bodies on the field will enable you to summon this card and use Magicalized Fusion or Witchcrafter Confusion Confession. Yes, this does count as a fusion spell. It does have fusion in its name. So then you can use Verte Anaconda to copy their effects from the deck, and provided that you have the necessary materials, you are able to bring out Witchcrafter Vice Madame, even if you may not have drawn Magicalized Fusion or Confusion Confession. Keep in mind though that thanks to Verte Anaconda's effect, after you perform the fusion summon, you're not able to special summon monsters for the rest of the turn. Another very important fusion tool to consider for the future is Blazing Cartesia, the Virtuous, which is not in Master Duel right now. She got released in Darkwing Blast, which coincided with the release of Vice Madame. So in the TCG, we are able to play a Witchcrafter deck which even more consistently is able to fuse into Vice Madame. But in Master Duel, for now, we're going to have to mainly go with this. I would also like to address the topic of hand traps really quickly. As you can see, we don't run Ash Blossom or Max C in this deck, since we play Reasoning, and if we special summon Max C or Ash Blossom off of Reasoning, that can be really detrimental to our game plan. Also, just in general, this deck doesn't have a lot of space for hand traps, as you can see, since there's just so many combo pieces that are pretty much required for us to run. There are some flex spots though, such as I mentioned earlier, Witchcrafter By Street and Draping. And Called by the Grave is a very important tool to prevent your opponent from ashing your plays, so I would definitely recommend it. But Forbidden Droplet is also another flex spot. You can play something else instead of that, or you can also just play 2 more copies of Forbidden Droplet. I like Droplet because it not only helps break an opponent's important negates potentially, but also it can help you setting up your graveyard, since you are sending stuff from your field or hand in order to pay the cost for Forbidden Droplet. So that could potentially be used on a chicken game or a restage and give you something that you otherwise wouldn't have. Now here's the second version of the Witchcrafter deck that I would like to show you. As I pointed out earlier, Magician's Souls and Illusion of Chaos are very important tools for us to extend, since it does give us a free body on the field and possibly lets us draw up to 2 cards. So if you want to increase the consistency of having Magician's Soul in your opening hand, then you can add 3 copies of Preparations of Rites, which is basically a free search for Illusion of Chaos, which lets you in turn search Magician's Soul. However, it is not a good idea to go with 3 of each, since there is a very high chance that you will then have multiple copies of each of these 3 cards in your opening hand, and only one of them will suffice. And then, in order to tie it all together, we have Chicken Game, which will let us draw a card. Basically, whenever we have it in our hand, it's a free draw, which very much comes in handy, because for our combo, we pretty much are required to use our entire hand. And the downside of Chicken Game would normally be that during your opponent's turn, your opponent would also be able to use it to draw a card, right? But with Magician's Soul's beautiful effect of being able to send up to 2 spells or traps from your hand or field to the graveyard, you're able to get rid of your own Chicken Game, get a free draw out of it, and possibly even get a free draw off of something like Magician's Restage. Now, of course, you can also try and play the grass version of this deck, which is also enhanced by the existence of the Ishizu cards. Now keep in mind that it is a 60 card deck and that the Grass Looks Greener card has been limited to 2 from 3. So it is possible that you can break pretty hard with this version of the deck. But if you do manage to mill a bunch of cards with whatever it may be, Reasoning, Monster Gate, Grass, or perhaps even the Ishizu engine, whenever you do get to do that, you do have a surplus of a lot of resources at your disposal. These are just 3 of the different Witchcrafter deck types that I would like to show you, but keep in mind that there are also mixed versions of this deck. For example, some people have reported some success with playing this deck with Branded, since Branded Fusion gives a very easy way to bring out all kinds of fusion monsters, which has some synergy with Vice Master. Also, potentially you could also play this deck with tier elements in the future once they get released, since tier elements and Witchcrafter alike do benefit from milled cards. Another deck type to consider could be Runic, but from my own experience I feel like Runic and Witchcrafter do have a little bit of synergy, but at the end of the day it feels more like you're playing 2 different engines alongside of each other rather than one unified deck. So do I think that this deck has potential to finally breach into top tier with the addition of the new cards? I think that is very hard to say. There are a lot of powerful decks, and Ishizu is very highly represented in the Master Duel ladder right now, which makes it very difficult for Witchcrafter to play the game, since we do rely on our graveyard effects and such. So while I do think that this is a new way for the Witchcrafter deck to be played entirely, and I'm very happy about the new combos that we have access to, I do think that this deck should be taken with a grain of salt. You will struggle a lot with the typical meta threats, and you might want to just consider this deck more a fun kind of thing to play. Nonetheless, thanks to its versatility, it can pack quite a punch and should not be underestimated. We have a hand here of Witchcrafter Jenny, Illusion of Chaos, Magicalized Fusion, Witchcrafter Holiday, and Witchcrafter Bystreet. And first order of business is that we use Illusions of Chaos effects for Magician's Soul. Magician's Soul is a very important part of this deck, as it enables some very good extension possibilities. Then we use Jenny's effect. Discard any Witchcrafter spell. It doesn't really matter which one, but getting something like Holiday in the graveyard is preferable. And with her effect we summon Shmierta. Getting Shmierta out into rotation is crucial to the rest of our combo. And you might think that it would be a better option to just go into one of the big Witchcrafter monsters like Ver or Heine as soon as possible, but it is very important that we get Shmierta and Jenny out into the field and then into the graveyard to enable our combos. Next, we use Shmierta's effect to bring out Pottery, of which we only play one, which is plenty enough though most of the time, since her effect can only be used if we have no cards in our hand at all. Then we use Magicalized Fusion to banish Shmierta and the Illusion of Chaos that we sent to the graveyard earlier with Magician's Soul, and perform a fusion summon to bring out Witchcrafter Vice Madame. Very important. It is important that we summon her in either the most right field zone, the middle field zone, or the most left field zone. You will see why that's important later. Also, I would like to point out that you have to accustom the monster that you mill from your deck to the graveyard with Magician's Soul according to your hand. If you have no way to access a low-level Witchcrafter monster in your opening hand, and you have Magicalized Fusion, you will have to send either Heine or Ver to the graveyard in order to have the material for Magicalized Fusion. Now, it kind of stings that Magicalized Fusion will banish the materials, so you are pretty much forced for the rest of the game to work without either Heine or Ver. But it is very important that we get out Witchcrafter Vice Madame on our first turn. So in an unfortunate situation like that, that is just a sacrifice that we're gonna have to make. And you're gonna have to make that call yourself. If you think that you are in a matchup where Ver is going to be more useful, then obviously you're going to use Heine for that. And if the opposite is true, if you think that Heine is going to be more useful, then you end up banishing Ver. Now that we have achieved our main objective of having Witchcrafter Vice Madame on the field, we used the two materials that we had on the field of Magician's Soul and Pottery, and summon Cross Sheep. Summon Cross Sheep in a way so that one of the arrows points to Witchcrafter Vice Madame. Now we use the effect of Pottery, which will in turn trigger the effect of Vice Madame. That lets us special summon a second Shmierta from our deck straight to the field. And what's important here is that you summon the Shmierta to the other field zone where the Cross Sheep is pointing. Because you may not know this, but Cross Sheep's effect, where you can special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard, has basically two different conditions. Either you have Cross Sheep on the field and you summon a fusion monster straight to one of the zones the Cross Sheep is pointing to, or what's going to be much more common in our kind of deck is that you already have the fusion on the field, then you summon a Cross Sheep so that it points to the fusion, and then you special summon something to the other field zone. That way, this effect, the special summon one level 4 or lower monster from the graveyard, will still trigger, because it specifically states you can apply the following effects in sequence based on the card types of the monsters this card points to. So we get another special summon with Cross Sheep. It doesn't matter which one. At this point you will pretty much have used up all of your small Witchcrafter effects on the field anyways. What matters here is that you end up with 4 monster materials on the field for Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess. Of course, Shmierta's Graveyard effect is still going to be useful, and will also trigger Vice Madame's second effect. Now keep in mind, every effect of Vice Madame can be used each time once per turn. That means you get to use all 3 effects every turn during your turn and your opponent's turn whenever you or your opponent use a spell card or use the effect of a non-fusion spellcaster monster. So now, since we have Holiday in our hand, we use its effect to bring back Heine and end up with this magnificent board of 1 targeted pop, 3 monster negates, protection through Witchcrafter by Street, and whenever we use the targeted effect of Heine, we get to use any of the 3 Vice Madam effects. So this presents a lot of interruption on the board. That is pretty much one of the most standard ways you can end your first turn with this deck. Next, I would like to show you the high roller hand, the perfect storm, so to speak. In this deck in particular, I've decided to play Chicken Game, and you will see very shortly why that is a great idea in combination with the entire Magician's Soul engine. So obviously, first we draw a Chicken Game, and usually the downside of Chicken Game would be that after you use it to draw, you are not able to easily get rid of it in order to prevent your opponent from using your own Chicken Game against you during their turn. But since we have Magician's Soul, we special summon it, and as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, we send Heine to the grave so that we can use Magicalized Fusion later. And in this starting hand, we had a restage, which is very good, because as you can see, I did this little combo here by sending Magician's Soul without using the effect yet. Magician's Soul has this very powerful effect where you can send 2 spells and traps from your hand or the field in order to draw that many cards. You can send up to 2 cards. That means you can only send 1 card or you can send 2 cards. It's up to you. Sometimes it can be a good idea to only send 1 card. But in this specific situation, we had pretty much a perfect hand to enable us to make the most use of Magician's Soul. So we sent Magician's Soul to the graveyard, special summon Artemis, and then with restage, we can bring back Magician's Soul right back to the field. Use its effect, draw 2 cards. And just like that, we have a board with 2 monsters set up. We have a loaded graveyard, and we have not only 5 cards in our hand from all the drawing we just did, but we also activated Restage's graveyard effect, where we get to search Magician's right hand, which is perfect. Then we use our 2 monsters to link summon Cross Sheep. And here comes the other application of Cross Sheep's special summon effect. As you can see, I fusion summon Vice Madam right into the zone where Cross Sheep points to. And if I had a level 4 or lower monster in my graveyard right now, I would be able to summon it. I don't have those, so we're gonna have to wait, but it's not the end of the world. Vice Madam's effect, special summon Schmetter, normal summon Jenny, use Schmetter's effect so that we can trigger Vice Madam and get the resources that we expended right back to our hand. And now we finally have a monster in the graveyard while Cross Sheep has its conditions fulfilled. So we get to special summon again and use these 3 monsters to go into a free material Appaloosa. And since we had Pottery on the field and we haven't used Pottery's effect yet in the entire game, we get to special summon Madame Vare. Now Shmieta uses her effect to get us by street. It comes back at the end phase, and just like that, we end on an even stronger board than before. We have a 3 negate Appaloosa, we have Vice Master, we have Madame Vare, which is basically a skill drain on legs. We managed to have Called by the Grave in our hand, so that's a very good card to have going into the next turn. We have Protection through By Street, and whenever our opponent is going to play their first spell card during the next turn, it's going to get negated by right hand. And that's about all I have to say today about my favorite deck in Master Duel, Witchcrafters. Thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more Witchcrafter gameplay, come by my cafe over at twitch.tv/cafefeco sometimes. And special thanks to the people from the Witchcrafter Discord for all the help with the deck building over time, and thank you very much to YGO-MD for letting me try out my deck against him to gather this amazing footage. Goodbye.